Hello, hello. Welcome back. I am Cool Cosmo today with my awesome sunglasses. Pretty obvious. Today, we're back into Travel 101, as we have been for a while now. We are nearing the end, and we're going to talk about public transit and or renting a car. There's just a lot of details here, and that's why I figured I would make a separate video. It's hard to say exactly what you should do because it really does depend on where you are. So I'm going to start with rental cars because that's a more singular subject, and then public transit has bus, train, trams, and maybe a few other things, variations of those. But let's start with renting a car. I have not done this personally, and I have not done it enough to get the general idea of how these things go. So I'm going to just tell you what I've found looking online or what I know from other people in a wheelchair and what they do. So you should have your own hand controls almost always, unless you can be certain that the rental car company that you're going to will absolutely have them for you and that they will have them ready. So the friend of mine who's also in a wheelchair, he travels pretty often, and I was told that he has his own hand controls that he compacts somehow, and there's a lot of hand controls online. They're usually just a stick that clamps on to the brake or the gas, and kind of expensive but also relatively cheap, and they're pretty minimal in the volume that they take up, and they're just sticks, metal sticks, so they can compact pretty well and they don't bulk much up, so they're okay to travel with. So I would think always bring them. Even if the rental car company does have hand controls, you should bring them anyway because you never know. And the not risk to benefit ratio, but what I like to call the packing hassle to benefit ratio is pretty small. So when you're thinking about packing, yes, it takes up space. Yes, it can add just to what you have to carry, especially if you're traveling alone. If you're not traveling alone, then maybe you don't have to drive at all. But it depends who you're with. If you're with a significant other and you prefer to drive, or you're with a friend and you prefer to drive, or you're with someone who's older and they can't really drive, then bring them and drive. But if you don't need to drive, then maybe just don't drive at all. But that's beside the point. That's in that case, we would never talk about this, but we are talking about this. So we're assuming that you're going to drive. When you are renting the car, in my experience, you don't pay anything. You reserve the car, but you pay when you get there. But that reservation, you never put in a credit card, or at least I never have. So there's no consequences to canceling the reservation last minute or just never showing up. Maybe there's some consequences, but not that I've ever heard of. And no financial consequences, at least not in the United States of America, where I have the most experience. Not with renting cars, but I know people who have rented cars, and I've done the rental process myself, but not for me. So with that said, when you're renting a car and you need to have hand controls, you need to call 2 days ahead, maybe 3 days ahead. If the company does offer hand controls, most likely it will say it. If you can't find it on the website, you can try to search with AI. That's pretty useful these days. You can put in the car rental company or just the area you're going to and have it look at the car rental companies available. Of course, double check that information. Actually go to the website. So when you're talking to the AI, make sure to ask it to give you the website that it's finding the information from so you can go and double check. After that, you call, email, put it in the reservation, whatever, that you need hand controls. And if you don't, if you just plan on bringing your own, they might not let you. They might not let you, especially if you're alone, let you just rent the car and put your own hand controls on. It creates a gray zone area of liability where you are making a modification to the car that they might not be okay with because they might have their own bylaws or rules and regulations, terms and conditions, stuff like that, where they don't let you modify a car in that way, especially if they offer it themselves. If they don't offer it, then maybe you can call ahead and tell them what you plan to do and get an approval from them. But if you don't get an approval, then maybe it's better just to rent the car and do it yourself and then don't tell them about it. But it would be pretty obvious if a person in a wheelchair is coming up and renting a car that they can't drive unless they put the hand controls on the spot. So I don't know too much about that process. But what I can tell you is call ahead. You can call multiple times. Make sure the reservation will have the hand controls when you arrive. Double check with them, call them, make sure they're installing the hand controls and everything. Okay, that's all I can really say about rental cars. It does depend on where you go in the world. And of course, this is when you check the website of where you're going. If you're going to a little town kind of in the middle of nowhere, then your chances of having an accessible car are much less. Be careful about where you're going and make sure that you really do investigate and look into whether or not you can actually get a rental car with hand controls, and if not, that you can add your own hand controls. If you're with somebody else, then you can do the rental with them and then later on put the hand controls on. That's probably fine and no one needs to know, and just take them off before you get there and don't put them on until you leave the premise. But if you get into an accident or something happens, then the liability, right? So there's a gray zone there because you would probably be liable and you can't have the company, whatever. If the company does install the hand controls and then something is faulty with the hand controls, then I would assume it's more liable on them. But I don't know for sure. Okay, we're done with the rental cars. Talked for a couple minutes here. Next thing is bus, tram, and train.